11:59pm tomorrow, the country moves to Phase 2 of the government's Omicron response. That means shorter isolation times and the test-to-work regime kicks in. It follows a record 981 cases today. We talk to businesses already on their knees due to staff shortages. Protesters at Parliament clogging streets and closing shops are offered free parking. We talk to a top negotiator about breaking the stalemate. Grounded Kiwis take flight in the High Court, challenging the legality of MIQ. We've got the latest. Name's Goff and he's off. Auckland's mayor calls time on politics. And roses are red, violets are blue. But watch out, Valentines Day could bankrupt you.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. New Zealand will enter the second phase of its Omicron response on Wednesday. From then on, the isolation period will be 10 days for cases and 7 for contacts. Cases will be notified via text message and directed to an online self-investigation tool focused on high-risk exposure. Asymptomatic essential workers who are close contacts can also begin to use rapid antigen tests to return to work. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says this will be a period of disruption and risk.
It'll be nothing like we've experienced to date, but our efforts with vaccination mean we have got to this place without the volume of serious illness and death that so many others have experienced. But it will be new, and so now is not the time to give up.
A journalist working in Parliament's press gallery tested positive for COVID-19 after taking a rapid antigen test this afternoon. It's the first public case of the virus at Parliament since the pandemic began. The individual tested positive during a rapid antigen test training session, so all other reporters at the session were asked not to attend the Prime Minister's post-cabinet media briefing. Jacinda Ardern says the tests are not always 100% accurate and the result of a PCR test is awaited. 981 new community cases of COVID have been reported today. Businesses near Parliament are urging the government to speak to protesters and break the deadlock so the capital can open up again. The protest is into its 7th day with no signs of abating. Bridget Tunnicliffe reports.
Affected businesses say they are holding on by a thread. Some bars and cafes have already temporarily closed their doors, while others say custom has dropped by up to 60%. At least 1,000 people are at the protest camp today, with the number of tents and shelters increasing. The police say disruption to residents, schools and places of work is creating real stress and concern, and people are feeling unsafe. They're appealing to protest groups to allow Wellingtonians freedom of movement around the area.
Wellington commuters who park at Sky Stadium can expect a police presence if protesters' vehicles are housed there. The stadium has offered the use of its car park in the hope it'll ease the pressure on roads blocked by protesters' vehicles. Chief Executive Shane Harman expects potentially 100 drivers will take up the offer.
There will be a police presence, so we can ensure that people can park as per normal safely, and that we don't anticipate any disruption to our normal commuter car parking business. But this is purely an effort on behalf of the stadium to assist with a practical solution for what's really now an untenable situation in Thorndon.
Shane Harman says the police have agreed to foot the bill for the safe parking. The St John of God order has been called Masters of Cover-Up. It's currently being investigated by the Abuse and Care Inquiry for its running of Maryland's school in Christchurch and the historical abuse of boys in its care. Clinical psychologist Michelle Mulvihill worked with the Catholic order to help it deal with the flood of complaints, both in New Zealand and in Australia. She says it became clear the order was in a state of denial because its problems were extensive.
These are the people are the masters of cover up. They're, in my view, moral simpletons. For decades, they have fashioned a capacity to hide from the challenges of the real world.
And about 5,000 people in Auckland are still without power this afternoon since the weekend's storm-damaged lines. At the height of the wild weather, Vector reported 50,000 people without power. The 5,000 who remain in the dark are mostly in the rural northern and western areas of the region. The Auckland Council has received more than 300 reports of fallen trees. Now to sport, and snowboarder Zoe Sadowski-Sinnott's quest for a second Winter Olympics gold medal is off to a good start. She's qualified in top spot for tomorrow's big air final in Beijing. The 22-year-old left her best until last, recording a score of 91 on her third qualifying run. She's the favourite in this discipline, having won bronze at the 2018 Games. Cole Wakashima had to withdraw from the event because of injury. However, Tian Collins is in the men's big air snowboard qualifying, starting at 5:30. Free skier Margot Hackett is 13th after one run in the rescheduled slope-style qualification. She needs to be in the top 12 after her second run, which starts soon to advance to the final. Meanwhile, a decision as to whether Russian teenage figure skater Kamila Valieva can keep competing is expected tonight. The 15-year-old European champion's failed drugs test has been the focus of a court of arbitration for sport hearing to decide if she can take part in tomorrow's individual women's event. And the Los Angeles Rams have won their second Super Bowl title. They came from behind in the fourth quarter to beat the Cincinnati Bengals 23-20. Quarterback Matthew Stafford sealed the scoreline in the 58th minute when he found wide receiver Cooper Kupp from close range for a touchdown. The Rams' only other NFL title came 22 years ago when they were based in St. Louis. That's the news.
The PM says get gone.
Go home and take your children.
A former National MP doesn't agree.
The right to decide what goes into your body overrules any of that greater good right.
But is there more at play?
305 videos from the misinformation community have generated 4.9 million views in the past week.
The day's news first. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumarunui. Mainly fine, however, scattered showers this afternoon and evening, especially around Taupo and the Bay of Plenty. For Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape. Cloudy with isolated showers today, gradually becoming fine tomorrow morning. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy. A few showers easing in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay this afternoon and becoming fine there later tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, also for Bulla and Westland. Fine today, apart from the odd shower about coastal Marlborough this afternoon, partly cloudy tomorrow. For Southland and Fiordland, fine today, becoming cloudy tomorrow morning with rain for Fiordland, but occasional rain elsewhere. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with 1 or 2 showers. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Stand by for Phase 2, with close to 1,000 new COVID cases recorded today. The country is heading into the next step of the COVID response, which is less about contact tracing and more about managing the virus at home.
As we shift our systems towards those most likely to get seriously unwell, those who need more help, and to preserve our hospitals for those who need them.
More on that shortly, but first, businesses near Parliament say they are only just holding on, with customers scared off by the massive group of protesters occupying the grounds. Some bars and cafes near the precinct have already been forced to temporarily close their doors, whilst others have lost half their customers. Locals say protesters are also controlling traffic, with nearby apartment dwellers forced to negotiate to get in and out over the weekend. And as Hamish Cardwell reports, there are now calls for the government to enter dialogue with the protesters in an attempt to break the deadlock and open the city back up.
Day 7 of the noisy occupation of Parliament, and there are no signs people are leaving. There are at least 1,000 people here today, and the number of illegally parked vehicles blocking streets and tents on the grounds and in the surrounding areas is increasing. The Backbencher pub is slap bang in the middle of it, forcing co-owner Alistair Boyce to shut its doors.
It's bloody hard. I don't know, like we're in real trouble. We're like, everyone is. Like, hospo businesses have only got weeks left. Like, seriously, it's just dire. We're on our knees.
He says the only way out of the deadlock is for the Prime Minister to meet with protesters to show she's listening, something Jacinda Ardern ruled out this afternoon.
What they want is negotiation with the government. What they've been given by the government is negotiation with the police. It's not going to work. They're not going to budge until they get some form of respect and acknowledgement from the government.
This local business owner, who did not want to be named, says takings nosedived since the protest started. She says most of the protesters are nice to her, but she has also feared for her safety at times when people become aggro when she tells them to wear a mask in her store.
We're a small business, we have to remain open, but at the same time I feel my health and my safety are all at risk as well.
She and other local business owners have told RNZ they need the government to give them support to be able to survive the protest. 80-year-old Ray Julian lives in the Kate Shepherd apartments, right in the thick of the occupation. Her age and asthma mean she's immunocompromised.
And that's bothering me more because I don't have a car. And therefore, if I want to go anywhere, I have to walk through the middle of them. I wear my mask. I'm not afraid of them, and I have got into conversation with a number of them. It hasn't had much of a useful effect, I should add, but I'm bothered because of COVID.
She's a former New Zealand Human Rights Commissioner and is no stranger to protests, having hit the streets just 2 weeks ago. But Ray Julian says this lot are going too far.
They are breaking the law. They're infringing people's rights. I might want to protest again within the next few weeks. What is what they're doing and getting away with saying for other protests on other issues? It's very important that we should have the right to protest. But there are boundaries, and they've gone beyond those boundaries.
Chris Roberts, who also lives at the Kate Shepherd apartments, says the protesters have taken over that part of town. He says he had to negotiate with the protesters to get his car in and out of the building over the weekend.
We haven't seen anyone at any of the intersections around here controlling traffic. It's actually the protesters who are controlling the traffic in the streets of Wellington right now.
A large number of local employers, including the nearby Victoria University Pipitea campus, have also shut, and public transport is being diverted away from the area, with the busy Molesworth Street and side streets totally blocked by trucks, camper vans and other vehicles. In a bid to ease the situation, the protesters are being given free parking at the nearby Sky Stadium from 6:30 this evening. But protester Michelle doubts there will be a mass exodus of vehicles.
It's about all of New Zealand, and if the shops on Mole Street and stuff have been affected, I don't think that's good. So if they do move their cars, I think that's awesome. A lot probably won't, but I think a lot will.
Time will tell whether the trucks and vehicles move away, but it does not look like the protest will end anytime soon.
It is 12 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. Haere Akine, coming up we talk to a top former police negotiator about breaking the protest stalemate. The foundational right of New Zealanders to return to their country is at the core of a legal battle being fought over the MIQ system. The case has been taken by the Grounded Kiwis group against the government and finally reached the High Court in Wellington today. Our reporter Nita Blake-Burson joins us now from the capital. Kia ora, Nita, what happened with the court case today?
There was a little bit of a last-minute change of plans, Lisa. The High Court in Wellington, for those who don't know, is about 200 metres away from those parliamentary protests we've just been hearing so much about. You really can see they are right on the doorstep. So today was supposed to have the public gallery available, as well as a bit of an overflow room for people to watch the court case. There is quite a bit of public interest in it, but all of that was scrapped and the proceedings were really scaled right back to just the lawyers and a couple of people with really intimate knowledge of the case, because there was a bit of concern that the protesters may get involved. I spoke to some of the Grounded Kiwis members who thought, given that their case is against the government, there might be some people who thought that they were adjacent issues. They did not think that there were. So, yeah, court staff made that last-minute change to scale things right back at the High Court in Wellington today.
Have the border announcements changed anything for Grounded Kiwis?
I'm sure there are a lot of people involved in the Grounded Kiwis group who are very pleased that it is going to be easier to come in and out of the country. But essentially when it comes to their case, no. That's because what we've seen over the past 18 months or however long those border restrictions have been in place in terms of limiting access in and out and the rights and the legalities of that system, that's really what they're getting at with their case at the moment. And their case also is about setting a precedent if this happens in the future, understanding what the rights are around returning Kiwis. So not so much that it's ready to be scrapped now that things are getting easy, but understand what the precedent is going forward.
There's been no end to the heart-wrenching stories of MIQ misery. Today, they made it to the High Court.
The lady whose son had died in his sleep and couldn't get home. The person at 6.33.2 who had a 14-year-old whāngai son who was undergoing cancer therapy, couldn't be home to be with him. The person at point 3 who was separated for her 2 teenage daughters for a year. At point 4, unable to return for 6 months despite the whole time being desperate to be with her grandmother who was at the end of her life and stepfather dying from mesothelioma.
Paul Radich QC arguing on behalf of grounded Kiwis that being able to enter New Zealand is a foundational right and laying out concerns with the system that has restricted entry to Aotearoa throughout the pandemic.
New Zealanders, Kiwis, us, have been stranded overseas. We're not talking about holiday makers, we're not talking about opportunists, we're talking about those needing to come home. We're talking about people who needed to be here for deeply upsetting family reasons.
Paul Radich says the case is about how much you can limit the right to return while striving all the time to consider less rights-limiting options. Essentially, he says public health was put above all else with not enough consideration given to the rights of returning New Zealanders.
The pendulum is firmly in the wrong place. The pendulum is firmly on the public health considerations at the expense of a real understanding of the way in which the fundamental right to be here is to take effect.
Grounded Kiwis is focusing its case on the period between September to December 2021 when people testing positive for COVID-19 in New Zealand could stay at home, but those who tested negative at the border had to stay in MIQ. He described the case being about putting a stake in the ground and making sure it doesn't happen again. The court proceedings were scaled right back today due to the Parliament protest taking place just a couple of 100 metres away. Te Kloa had travelled all the way to Wellington from Te Anau to support grounded Kiwis, but instead had to watch on a live feed.
Because there are so many people still stuck overseas, and what the government is doing is not right, and they need to be held accountable. There needs to be a watchdog that stops them from making these sweeping decisions unilaterally without any kind of watchdog, basically, to say this isn't right.
T had been in the Netherlands last year when her visa expired and she battled the system to get back, eventually returning in November.
There needs to be some kind of oversight to government making these decisions that affects literally thousands of people that are citizens trying to get back to this country.
Sarah Romans had also hoped to attend today's hearing in person, but she too was forced to watch online. She was stuck in Melbourne between August and November last year due to the lack of MIQ availability.
It's putting the Human Rights Act, including our New Zealand citizens' rights to re-enter New Zealand, against the Public Health Act.
It's an issue, she says, is vital is resolved.
So it's really important for us now, but also for any future pandemic managements, that we have a sense of which bit of legislation takes priority and in what ways.
The hearing is set down for 2 days with the Crown to respond tomorrow. Despite the impending changes at the border, this group wants to make sure they're not shut out if the border slams shut again.
It is 18 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Returning now to the protest at Parliament. It's been a week and they're still there in big numbers. The grounds are a complete bog hole and the Speaker's attempt to drive them out with unpopular pop tunes and a drenching from the sprinklers has failed. It's a mix of causes, but there is a core element of anti-vax and anti-mandate protesters. And this evening, police are trying to coax those people who abandoned their cars, camper vans and utes on the capital's streets to move them to Sky Stadium. Former lead crisis negotiator for the police, Lance Burdett, knows his way out of a sticky situation and he joins us now. Kia ora, Lance. I mean, people, casual observers watching this will be going, seriously, free parking and a please and thank you if you move your car. Is that the right move and the right message from the police?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. There's a couple of things in there. The first thing is it's not a bad move, actually, because when you offer something to somebody, they offer something back. And it's a tactic that you can use. It's one that's used in many, many situations of giving something first to show that you are in that position to talk. Now, the thing about the police are in charge of security. They're not going to be in charge of negotiating. The thing about all this whole protest, if I'm understanding it correctly, is it's about speaking to the government or speaking with the government about what's happening. People are frustrated. This is just the outward emotion of what people are feeling inside. And so, yes, that's one option you might have, and perhaps people, as they drive away, might think, oh, I've had enough and drive and keep driving. Or, yes, you can park there. That opens up the road. So we've had these occupations before. Do you remember the occupation movement? Same sort of thing happened there.
So the thing is this an entirely political situation? If you say that the police are not in charge with negotiating, does someone within Parliament need to make a concession and meet with these people?
Well, that's what I'd be questioning. What do they want? So it's all about mandates. It's about anti-vax. It's everything, right? So we've been locked down for 2 years now. This type of action is happening globally. It happens in Canada right now, and it's happening everywhere around the world in countries where people have been basically told to stay at home and told what they can and can't do. People can put up with that for a while, and then eventually the frustration just builds up. Look, there's people down there in those protest groups. Yes, you're always going to have the outliers. You're always going to have that fringe element that, I guess, sour it for everybody else. But in that group, and I've recognised some of them, are professional people who are there to make a point.
So how do you do it without losing face, right? Because a lot of these politicians have spoken, some tough speak there. The Prime Minister's told them to go home and take their kids with them. And a number have said they're not going to go out there and talk to them, right? So who in their right mind would wander down the steps of Parliament and go up to that group? Or how do you do it without looking like you're the weaker person and capitulating?
Right. Well, for people to come together, somebody has to make the first move. They've made the first move by coming to Parliament grounds. The second move should be through somebody from government. It doesn't have to be the Prime Minister. It could be anyone. Now, you get with the group, you have a spokesperson, and it's not done in Parliament grounds. You have to remove the people away from the emotion itself, which is in the grounds. And so it's called change position. When you move somebody away from the site, it starts to calm them down. So you meet in a neutral venue, someone from Parliament, 5 or 6 people. So you don't have, 5 or 6 lawyers and all that there. It's just 1 or 2 people from the government, whoever that might be. Doesn't have to be a front bencher, but somebody from that's going to take the message back, hear what they have to say.
Who brokers that, Lance? Do the police broker that, or someone entirely independent like a mediator? Are you offering yourself up?
Well, I'd love to be down there, but fortunately for me, I'm quite busy with work with de-escalation coaching sessions at the moment because people are in a heightened state. Violence and anger and aggression has increased 30% globally at the moment. And so I'm busy with that, but I would love to be part of that. Now, the thing is that the security of Parliament is what the police are there for, and the security of the protesters.
So who brokers it then, Lance?
Well, I would be hoping that somebody independent would come along and say, look, I'm happy to mediate. Or just somebody from Parliament to take the first step and go down and say, look, and tomorrow I'd like to meet up with a group. We've got a couple of people we want to meet with you. Here's the venue. If you would like to spend the night thinking about who those 5 or 6 people would be, and then head off site and talk.
So how long do you let this go on for, though, if you're unable to negotiate an out? Because, again, people watching this have seen Parliament grounds being hacked up, seeing massive amounts of food and supplies being trucked in there, and seemingly no attempt to stop that. All the things that are sustaining them in this activity are still allowed to go on. Should you cut off some of that?
You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, Lisa. It's that hard juxtaposition. I wouldn't be cutting off food. I wouldn't. That's all old. That's 20 years ago. Let's cut off the power. Let's cut off the water. Let's cut off the phone. Let's make them cold. Let's make them miserable. Let's play music. That stuff was 20 years ago. These days, it's more about coming together, and there are plenty of opportunities to come together. It's just having one person from one side make that first move.
Great to talk to you, Lance. Thanks for joining us. That's Lance Burdett, former lead crisis negotiator for the police. Now, the police are giving an update at the moment on the situation outside Parliament. Superintendent Corey Parnell, the Wellington District Commander, says police have opened lines of communication with some key influencers in the protest group. Now, they're hoping to make progress with moving vehicles this evening. He says Wellingtonians have had a gutsful. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on this one. Nō reira ānei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Lance Burdett, they're saying that someone needs to make a concession and potentially that someone from within Parliament to meet on neutral ground with some of the protesters to talk this out. Do you agree? If not, why not? Let us know your thoughts. Pātui mai, text me 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Shorter isolation times and less intensive contact tracing is on the horizon. New Zealand will step into phase 2 of the Omicron response from Wednesday. The shift has just been announced after another steep rise in COVID-19 cases. There were 981 recorded in the community today. As well as that, nearly 5,000 people in the community are now known to have the virus, and there's warnings the true total could be as high as 50,000. Katie Todd reports.
COVID-19 is quickly increasing its prevalence in the community. Now health officials are changing how positive cases are managed. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the country will move to phase 2 of the Omicron response from 11:59 p.m. tomorrow.
This means we can move our focus to a phase of greater self-management for most New Zealanders as we shift our systems towards those most likely to get seriously unwell, those who need more help, and to preserve our hospitals for those who need them.
Phase 2 will ease the burden on contact tracers. They'll rely less on phone calls using text messaging and digital technology instead. The isolation period will drop to 10 days for cases and 7 days for contacts. Pacifica health expert Dr. Colin Tukui-Tonga says that's overdue. He says the sheer number of people isolating at home with COVID-19 and their contacts has already surpassed the level that health providers can keep up with in places like South Auckland.
The system is stretched, and the Pacific providers in particular are just a manifestation of the system under duress. You know, overnight, the number of cases has rose exponentially, so there's lots of cases to manage and support as well as the contacts. A reduction in the requirement for isolation for cases would be a practical difference to providers.
Also stretched are the testing sites. In Auckland, there were lengthy queues at some centres today, and Northern Region Health Coordination Centre says it expects continued high demand in the next few weeks. It's asking only symptomatic people, close contacts, and those subject to mandatory testing orders to get a swab, and for people in the queue to be patient and pack water and snacks. Infectious diseases expert Professor Kurt Krauss from the University of Otago admits the steep surge in cases may seem a little scary, especially when the real number of infections in the community could be 10 or 12 times higher. Just 188 new daily infections were reported this time last week, then 981 today. He predicts it will keep going up.
I expect that we should see significantly bigger numbers as we move through the week, although it would be hard to predict the peak right at this point.
Professor Krauss says there is also a lot to be relieved about. He believes the country is ready for Omicron. Case numbers are growing on the same trajectory as they did overseas, so he says we might expect a similar plateau at the peak.
Generally speaking, if you look what's happened overseas, it's kind of a 6 to 8 week period where Omicron plays out, and then we'll be through this. And it's also looking like so far, at least overseas, there hasn't been a big jump up after Omicron.
What experts agree will help ease the shock of Omicron is the vaccination program. 60% of those eligible for a booster have received one, with nearly 2 million doses administered overall. Immunologist Dr. Diane Sika-Pautonu says the country can't afford to let its guard down.
We need to keep doing everything that we can in order to try and not just slow down the spread of Omicron, but to ensure that our children, our little ones, aged 5 to 11, are getting vaccinated, but also that people are getting boosted and that people who need to be tested are actually getting tested and that we isolate accordingly.
Advice to live by as Omicron really takes hold.
Snowboarder Zoe Sadowski-Synnott is edging closer to another Winter Olympic medal. She's competing in the big air competition this afternoon. Our reporter Timothy Brown joins me now from Wanaka, where her family and friends have been watching the action. Timothy, how did Zoe go?
Kia ora, Lisa. 3 words. She nailed it. She was all but assured of making the final through qualification through her first 2 runs, and in her 3rd run she threw it down, massive 1080, frontside 1080 to score 91, the highest qualifying run of the competition.
Yeah, so what happens now then, Timothy?
Here we go. Now, today pretty much is a write-off. It gets them through, so the top 12 snowboarders go through until tomorrow's event. They have 3 runs again. The top 2 runs will combine to give them their score, and as long as Zoe's at the top again tomorrow, she'll be a double gold medalist.
That'd be fantastic. Now, how are the other Kiwis going today?
Well, unfortunately, Margot Hackett has just missed out on qualification in the slopestyle and the skiing. She came 16th, had to be top 12 to make it through. But at 6:30 tonight, we've got Tian Collins, who's going to be competing in the male big air.
Thanks, Timothy. That is Timothy Brown joining us from Wanaka there. He's been watching Zoe Sadowski-Synnott, who's looking good for another medal. We don't want to jinx her, though. Let's get to some of your feedback. Boy, it's pouring in on the protest down in Wellington. This one from Pamela, who says, I'm a regular user of the Sky Stadium car park in Wellington. I am incensed that the protesters are being offered free parking, paid for by the New Zealand Police. If I was able to go to work as usual at the National Library, I would apparently still have to pay $15 and then navigate my way through the protesters. It's intimidating, unsafe and not fair to the majority of New Zealanders who think this protest is a farce and needs to be ended now. Meg in Auckland says, dialogue with the protesters? No. One at a time, arrest them. Tow their vehicles. They are bullying those apartment dwellers. Thanks for your feedback. It's iwi e Hariakine e checkpoint. Some businesses are already struggling as increasing numbers of staff have to isolate. Another New Zealand sportsperson, golfer Ryan Fox, nails it in the biggest win of his career. And the price of love, it's a hell of a lot if you're planning on saying it with roses. Homai Ofakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anei a iwi mina pita kōrero.
Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Self-isolation periods will reduce to 10 days for COVID-19 cases and 7 for contacts as New Zealand moves into the 2nd phase of its Omicron response on Wednesday. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it'll be a period of disruption and risk. Asymptomatic essential workers who are close contacts can also begin to use rapid antigen tests to return to work. And cases will be notified via text message and directed to an online self-investigation tool focused on high-risk exposure. Auckland public health officials say people who are unlikely to have COVID-19 or who haven't been advised to get tested risk being turned away from testing centres. With daily infection numbers rising sharply, the Northern Regional Health Coordination Centre's Chief Clinical Officer, Andrew Old, says there's expected to be high demand at centres over the coming days, and the demand has to be managed. 981 cases were recorded today. Police will be speaking with some key influencers in the Parliament protest group. They say they want to move the protest back to a lawful state, but there are factions that have stopped that from happening. Wellington District Commander Superintendent Corey Parnell says officers are hoping to make progress with moving vehicles tonight after Sky Stadium offered secure parking places. He says Wellingtonians have had a guts full of the demonstration. Gold medal favourite, New Zealander Zoe Sadowski-Synnott is the top qualifier for tomorrow's big air final at the Winter Olympics. And around 2 hectares of dense scrub has been destroyed in a fire at Lake Ohia in the far north. 4 helicopters and 2 ground crews are battling the flames. Fire and Emergency District Manager Wipari Henwood says the fire is about 4 kilometres inland from the Karikari Peninsula vegetation fire that's been burning since last month. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. It is time for business. Kei kona Anona Peltier, mina kaupapa kai Pakahi. She joins us now from our Auckland newsroom. Nona, casino operator Sky City had a disappointing first half year. What are the numbers?
Yeah, they made a net loss of $33.7 million, and that's for the first half ended in December. And that's versus a net profit of $77.9 million the year earlier. So that gives you an indication of how far down they've dropped. Now, they're hoping to return to profitability to pre-COVID levels. That's what they saw in 2019. But there's a lot of provisions around that. For example, for now, they're a little bit concerned about Omicron, and the red light settings are making it difficult for New Zealand. They expect tourism to pick up again, well, faster in Australia than in New Zealand, as long as that quarantine period remains in place for visitors. They're not expecting international tourism to come back. So in the meantime, they're holding their own. I guess they've got enough money on their balance sheet. They did provide an update, though, on the International Convention Centre, as you might recall, was fire damaged back pre-COVID as well, as a matter of fact. They're expecting the Horizon Hotel, to reopen and to rather officially open in 2024, with the Convention Centre the following year.
Now, Nona, our listeners probably have noticed that food prices have surged with the biggest monthly increases in 5 years. Explain it to us all. Why is that happening?
Well, there's a number of reasons. First of all, the food prices in January were nearly 6% higher than they were the same time a year earlier. So that's a big increase. And that's in line with what we're seeing with inflation generally. The types of things that we've seen increases in would be higher fruit and vegetable prices, for example. Also, just everyday items like broccoli, lettuce, apples, strawberries, kiwi fruit. They were offset by some lower prices for beans, grapes, and courgettes. But otherwise, overall, the food sector is higher. That's inflationary. And of course, we're seeing that flowing through into our markets. For example, today, the New Zealand Top 50 Index, it ended down 1.9%. And that's a lot of concern about inflation, rising interest rates, but not just that. The threat of war between Russia and the Ukraine is another issue. The New Zealand dollar is also a little bit weaker today against the U.S., which is strong, given that the U.S. are talking about interest rate hikes there, with very high inflation at a 40-year high, 66.2 US cents, 93 Australian, and 48.9 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Now, the romantics among us have had to cough up big time to fork out for red roses for Valentine's Day. Imports have been affected by shipping delays, and hot weather has stunted the growth of New Zealand-grown roses. Sally Murphy explains.
Nothing says I love you like a bunch of red roses, but some shoppers might have found them hard to come by this Valentine's Day. Blooming Hill in Pukekohe is the country's largest rose grower. Managing Director Frans von Dorser says it's been a difficult year.
The weather has caused a few issues with growth. Mainly, it's put extra stress on the plants, extra heat, and so they haven't grown as long as they would have traditionally done. But in general, local rose production is up on previous years, which is great news.
Frans von Dorser says florists also rely on imported flowers, but shipping delays and logistic issues means many didn't arrive in time, pushing up demand and prices for locally grown roses.
I haven't done our analysis yet, so I can't, I'm not... it's just anecdotal at the moment, but for the long premium stuff, I'd say maybe they doubled. For the shorter stuff, I'd say maybe about 50 to 75%. That's for the reds.
Danielle Eels runs Bourbon Rose Florist in the Crossing Mall in central Christchurch. She says the inflated prices, alongside fewer people working in the city due to the red light COVID setting, is making Valentine's harder this year.
Normally, we would be making pretty good profit margins to be able to carry us through starting to get into winter because, flower sales quieten down in winter anyway. But the other issue is the prices of flowers, which is astronomical. So we've had to reduce our profit margin to be able to still produce a nice bouquet for a customer. And we've had to reduce our profit margin. So we're kind of being hit. It's a bit of a double whammy.
Miss Eel says even after dropping her profit margin by 30%, a dozen red roses will cost $190 today.
Flower wholesaler Fresh Direct Flowers is predicting the shortage of roses will have resulted in many florists selling out of them early in the day. General Manager Steve Foster is encouraging people to buy alternatives.
We'd certainly encourage people to go out and look for flowers, sunflowers, hydrangeas, Lysianthus. There's a whole bunch of beautiful flowers out there that are fresh and that are in season and available. So if the red rose is unavailable, there's certainly coloured roses, and there's certainly all those other types of flowers that are just as beautiful.
Christchurch florist Danielle Eels says despite the more difficult trading circumstances, there's still plenty of love in the air, and flowers of all kinds are flowing out the door today.
People have been left stranded in their homes and power is out to thousands across the country in the wake of a huge storm over the weekend. The rains have cleared and the winds have died down, but the clean-up job is still underway. But as Jimmy Ellingham reports, the effects are still being felt.
Waikato dairy farmer Annabelle Shearer is today facing an anxious wait to see if the power will come back on. Her property is one of thousands across the North Island without electricity as lines companies work to repair damage caused by high winds. Annabelle Shearer says the power went off at her farm about 3:30 this morning, and she knows of people nearby in Gordonton in the dark for longer.
Cows need to be milked twice a day, obviously morning milking and afternoon milking, and it means that they haven't been milked this morning, so they can get quite uncomfortable with the amount of milk that they've got on, and so it just impacts quite significantly a dairy farmer, really.
Annabelle Shearer is looking at options such as using a power generator in her milking sheds for her 200 cows if the outage continues. Meanwhile, the farm's maize crop has been damaged in the high winds. Ex-cyclone Dovie also affected her youngest two children, who came home early from Whitikahu School. Principal Brent Harper says about 3/4 of the school's 120 pupils went home this morning.
We lost power early this morning, and without having adequate water access or being able to flush the toilets and have our drinking fountains going, that just became a health and safety issue. So we made a call to invite parents to come in and bring their kids home.
Brent Harper says power and water were restored at lunchtime, and pupils unable to leave could still have lessons. Also affected by the winds is Hamilton Girls High School, which is closed until Thursday while damage to buildings from falling trees is repaired. A sodden weekend in Wellington caused slips in the capital. In Wairarapa, roads filled with water, making some still impassable today. Susie Hanson and her partner and son were unable to get to school or work because of water on Taumata Island Road, east of Greytown. Susie Hanson's 7-year-old son Leo Taylor managed to keep himself amused.
It's just waist-high flood water in our driveway. My son wanted to go surfing, so he went surfing. So we're still flooded in today, but it's definitely receded. You can walk around now in our backyard, but we can't get out of the road. The roads are still blocked.
Through the central North Island, more roads were closed, including a flooded section of State Highway 1 near Martin in Rangatike, which reopened today. Contractors are clearing tree debris from streets in Palmerston North, and in South Taranaki, a family had a close call yesterday when high winds brought down a mature tree at their Hawera home. Te Kere Davies says the first he knew something was wrong was when he heard his wife Jo yelling.
I was in the kitchen and my wife was in the lounge with the kids and I hear her yelling, and so I go into the lounge and I see that the tree that our kids' swing hangs from had fallen into our backyard, crashed through our lounge window.
Te Kere Davies says he faces a few days on the end of a chainsaw because his insurance does not cover arborists' costs. In Auckland this afternoon, about 5,000 people remained without power, mostly in the north and west of the region, down from 50,000 at one stage. Auckland Council has received more than 3,000 reports of fallen trees. Such extremes aren't expected for the rest of the week, as the Met Service forecasts a return to calm weather.
Police have just been updating media on the situation with the protest at Parliament. Our reporter Emma Hatton has come from that news conference and joins me now. Kia ora, Emma, what do they have to say?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, well, we've just had an update from Superintendent Corey Parnell, and he has given an update on the attempts there to move the 100 or so vehicles that have been gridlocking the CBD in Wellington for the past week. And he says that communication lines have been open with the various, organisations, the various protest groups that are down there at Parliament. And he's actually quite confident that the majority of vehicles on Molesworth Street will be cleared by this evening. So that's quite a big bit of news for Wellingtonians who have been fed up with this gridlock that's been there for the past week.
What did he have to say about the army?
Well, he's been in touch, police have been in touch with the Defence Force just to sound out what sort of resources and what sort of help they could provide should it come to that. There's no indication that the Defence Force or any army personnel are to be brought in at this stage. The optimal, option that police are pursuing is still communication and, sort of a catch more flies with honey than vinegar approach, I suppose. So they're pursuing that option of continuing to talk with the protesters rather than threatening the big guns or anything like that. Obviously, we saw in the early phases of this that arrests aren't going to work, and police have admitted that they're not going to be able to arrest their way out of this. So that is something that has been, I guess, entertained, but not something that's set in stone by any stretch.
And Emma, just before you go, did the superintendent give many details about who they're actually talking to? Because he said before it's difficult to have communication because there's a bunch of different agendas there.
Well, that's right, and that's been one of the huge difficulties with trying to manage this protest and work out the best way forward, is because police have struggled to figure out who is actually down there and who's in charge and what the demands actually are. So Corey Parnell is quite confident that they've got those communication lines open now. They've been able to identify what he's described as the various factions of the protests. He obviously says there are outliers. He describes them as elitists down there, and there's just no way that they're getting through to them, but that it is a small minority there, and they are quite confident that they are working, proactively and making progress with people down there who are willing to have those conversations. And obviously part of those conversations have been the movement of those vehicles and getting them off the road. And from 6:30 this evening, actually, within the next hour, that's going to become an option for protesters to move their vehicles into the underground car park at Sky Stadium, which is just down the road.
Thanks for the update, Emma. That's our reporter Emma Hatton, who's been speaking with the police this afternoon. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hey, moriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the long goodbye. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff confirms he's tapping out after 40 years in politics. Some hospitality businesses feel they're getting the cold shoulder again from government after being left out of the test to work regime that's designed to keep the doors open during peak Omicron. With COVID infections climbing, the country's moving to phase 2 of the Omicron response tomorrow night. Now, that includes test to work, where staff in so-called critical industries can bypass isolation if they're close contacts, as long as they return negative daily rapid antigen tests. And those tests will be supplied by the government. So far, 5,620 businesses have joined the exemption scheme, but the already strained hospitality sector says it isn't considered a critical industry. Mandy Lusk from Vivace Restaurant in Auckland is on the line now. Hi, Mandy.
Hi there.
Hey, Valentine's Day. Let's start with that, Because I presume it would normally be a pretty pumping day for you in the restaurant industry. How's it been and how's it looking?
Well, it's great. We are full tonight, but when I say full, we're 40% down on capacity due to level red restrictions, just with the distance seating. So it's a bit heartbreaking turning away people knowing that probably tomorrow night we'll have less than half a dozen tables in here at the moment.
So we
could certainly do with those extra seats in there tonight.
Yeah, so that's the 100-person limit, right, under the red light restrictions.
And more so the distance seating, because not all of us are big. The big ones are probably hundreds of seats down. And in our case, it's just complying with that distance seating. We can't fit 100 people in at that level.
As we get more daily cases in a record number today, Mandy, I mean, it must be roulette in terms of your staff coming in contact with this in Auckland and having to isolate. What is your situation at the moment?
We've got 3 staff on stand down at the moment, none of whom are even close contacts. They are flatmates of close contacts, as so many young people living in, apartments and houses with several people within, in our case, all of them are with another hospitality industry members. Some of them are tied up with the Queenstown link, unfortunately, and one of the chefs flew back from Queenstown, which took out all their flatmates. I think the others all work in other inner city restaurants, so they're all standing down tonight too.
So where does that leave you?
Running. pretty much. There's nothing we can do. We can't. I was lucky enough to be able to get a rat test from someone last week for a similar situation. Someone had already managed to get some through. We ordered ours weeks and weeks ago, and obviously the order didn't come through for reasons we all are fully aware of.
Mandy, be clear on that. What did the supplier say to you? So you had an order. Had you paid for them?
Yes, we've paid for them.
Okay, and what happened?
Short supply, out of stock, and on back order. And we've had no update. So we're still none the wiser as to when they might actually arrive in the country. And it's pretty frustrating, especially when they're not even close contacts. They're just considered, flatmates of, and there's nothing we can do. And it has the potential to close all of us down, I think, within a week or so. Just purely, there's nothing I can say. There's nothing we can do. Even the PCRs, we had a staff person who was his girlfriend's sister had it last week, and he waited 3 days to get his PCR results. We can't really operate like that.
Mandy, does it make a difference? Obviously, at 11:59 tomorrow night, we go to phase 2, right, of the Omicron response, which means that close contacts, the isolation period is going to drop from 10 days to 7 days. Is that going to help you?
No, it's not. 7 days, because we're one of these industries that you can't work from home. There's nothing our staff can do from home, and we are, yet again, unable to earn any form of income whatsoever. If we've got too many staff isolated, we simply can't open. And, if this is going to be the approach, we're almost better off being closed. And it's heartbreaking walking down the road and seeing two places close their doors in the last 3 days, and just taking a siesta. We'll be back in a few months, hopefully.
So, Mandy, what if you could get your hand on rapid antigen tests from the government, like critical businesses? Do you want to be in on that scheme? Would it make a difference?
Absolutely, but we rang the Ministry of Health today and we are not considered a critical business at all. And our policy always had been, which is why we pre-ordered them, was to test all our staff because they are young and they do go out and socialise, and we're trying to be as proactive as we possibly can. We intended on testing every single one of them for their first shift of the week, just so we knew that they were all clear when we opened, so that we were as safe as we could possibly be. But yeah, I just don't know when we'll be able to get hold of them. We've ordered some through Amazon, but we've done that before and it didn't make it through. So,
Amanda, you will appreciate that some people listening to this will think restaurant business is nice to have. It's not critical, right? So what would your case be to be included in those rapid antigen tests from the government, and to perhaps have a wider approach in allowing business to have access? What is the argument for that in your mind?
I feel that any small business that can't work from home, that is going to be closed down with no income, is critical, because it just means we can only, we've had a third of the last 2 years, 30% of the time, we've been unable to earn any income. If we fold now, we don't have any reserves, purely because I don't think anyone else would either if they'd been, banned from earning an income for that long. If we go down, all our pool suppliers get stuck. The staff obviously lose wages. Our landlords get hit. The tax department, because we clearly will have tax debts going. I think, yes, we are a luxury, but we also support an awful lot of people. There are an awful lot of small farmers and things that lose their whole, if you like, paddock to table thing. They don't sell to supermarkets. If we all fold because we're all shut down, and I totally understand businesses if they've had positive cases being closed. I really do get that. But if we're being closed down for no other reason other than they've been in the same house as someone who was in the same building or supermarket or something as a close contact, it just seems ludicrous.
Thank you for your time this evening, Mandy. That is Mandy Luss from Vivace Restaurant in Auckland. New Zealand golfer Ryan Fox is looking forward to reuniting with family as he heads home after the biggest win of his career. 35-year-old Fox finished 5 shots ahead of the field to secure the win in the Res Al Khaimah Classic in the UAE, which also earned him $500,000 in prize money. Fox led from start to finish, but still had to overcome nerves to secure the win.
Sleeping on a 6-shot lead, I did not sleep very well last night. A bit nervous, I had that awful feeling in the pit of my stomach all day, but I'm very happy with how I played. A couple of great shots coming down the stretch. Was certainly nice walking up the last with my putter in hand and knowing I had 5 or 6 putts or whatever it was for it.
He's been away from home for a month, during which time his young daughter has started walking. Fox said his family was very much on his mind as he was finishing his round.
I was definitely thinking about the family coming down the last couple of holes. I'm a bit disappointed I missed her walking, and I've got 10 days in a hotel when I get home to think about that as well. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing them when I get out late February.
And as Ryan mentioned there, he will be heading into 10 days of MIQ as he returns home. Now to a heroic rescue with just seconds to spare in the US. A pilot in Los Angeles became trapped in a crashed plane, stuck on train tracks and facing an incoming train. CNN's Joss Campbell has this report.
A Los Angeles commuter train slamming into a downed plane. Mere seconds before impact, the pilot was still trapped inside. Go, 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 go! First, he survived the plane crash. Then that speeding train, saved from certain death by the heroic efforts of Los Angeles police officers.
I knew that if we failed this man that he would die, and I didn't want to be the one to have to watch him die.
It all started on a sunny Sunday. A pilot in distress, unable to reach a nearby runway. LAPD Sergeant Joseph Cavastani saw it all going down.
It took me a second to realize what it was, but knowing that the airport's right here, I pretty much understood that it was going to be an airplane.
The pilot managed to avoid a busy intersection, instead coming to a stop on the tracks. LAPD radioed dispatch to stop all trains.
I wasn't sure of his injuries, if he had any neck or spinal injuries. We were just going to wait for the fire department to get there to extricate him and render, first aid.
Now, Metrolink says it can stop a train within 5 minutes. The problem for these officers, the next train through this intersection was only minutes away.
How could this get any worse? Well, it just happened.
Officers Robert Chirac and Damian Castro were directing traffic when warning bells began sounding and the gates started to come down.
And then I looked over to my right down the tracks and I saw these 3 giant headlights from a train. And I don't know, something, I know he had requested to stop the train, but just something in my head, I just knew this train's not going to stop.
Officer Castro tried to break a mangled panel that was trapping the pilot inside the plane.
As I'm trying to pull it off, it's not coming off, and I look back one more time and I see the train was approaching a lot faster than I thought it was. So at that point, I said, forget about the panel, grabbed onto him and helped pull him out.
4 seconds later.
And then I just remember thinking, well, now is the plane going to hit me, or is it going to catch on fire or blow up?
Pieces of the plane rained down on bystanders, but no one else on the ground or the train was hurt. It's a story that has garnered international attention and praise for a group of officers who went beyond the call, risking their own lives to save another. Many now calling them heroes. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
Honestly, that's not the word that, we associate ourselves with. It's part of the job.
Officers around the world do this every day. Maybe not a train coming at them, but they're saving lives all the time, putting their lives on the line.
Got him out. He's out. He's alive.
It's hard enough being pregnant and giving birth in COVID times, but you've got to feel for one Queensland mother forced to have her baby on the side of a regional highway. Young mother says she was turned away from her local hospital because its maternity suite had been turned into a COVID ward. Her experience is again sparking conversations in Australia about the strain put on health services during the pandemic. The ABC's John Daly reports.
Yvette Bracefield's baby girl Beatrix let out her first cry on the Warrego Highway in southern Queensland.
It worked out well for us, but when I look back and think about, if one thing had been slightly different, if the umbilical cord had been around her neck, if I'd bled heavily after giving birth, we would have been at great risk.
Kind of has 2 modes, awake or feeding. Sleeping or feeding, I should
say. The birthing suite at her local hospital in Chinchilla, 290 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, had been converted to a COVID ward. When Yvette Bracefield turned up there, she was told by nurses to drive an hour to the neighbouring town of Dalby.
I couldn't have sat buckled in because of the strength of the contractions. So I was on my knees facing the passenger seat, and I was holding on to the passenger seat, and the glove box was at my back.
She isn't the first pregnant woman from Chinchilla and surrounding towns to make the nervous drive to Dalby. Chinchilla Hospital has a long history of disrupted maternity services, largely due to staff shortages.
It's unacceptable that in somewhere like Australia, a woman would have to give birth by the side of the road.
Since being interviewed by the ABC, Yvette Bracefield has been contacted by a senior Darling Downs health official who's told her the birthing suite has been restored. In a statement to the ABC, a Darling Downs health spokesperson said the hospital hadn't had any COVID patients yet, and the birthing suite continued to be used for maternity care.
Alrighty, let's get to some more of your feedback about the protest in Wellington. It seems like a bunch of you have had enough of them. Sharon says, tow their cars, don't give them more free parking. We Wellingtonians have had a guts full. That former Human Rights Commissioner spoke truth to power. The protesters have had their chance, made their random points. Go home, says Sharon. Thomas says, I feel the protesters need to go. I don't think they even warrant having any consultation with any of the political parties. If they wanted to protest peacefully, that's fine. But the way they've gone about it, they have lost any support, sympathy and respect from me. They don't obviously care about other people, those who have a living to make and those who have other health issues. Their behaviour towards journalists, towards people walking past is appalling. As for the vehicles, I would just impound the lot of them and they can pay to have them returned, says Thomas. Ray says, I disagree with the protesters' position and troublemaking, but the government's inability to engage lacks maturity and is embarrassing. And this person, no, don't agree with the negotiator. Fine if they were playing by the rules, but they are not. Illegally protesting, affecting locals and their businesses, it's all about them. I'm a nurse and sadly I know some who are protesting. However, their association standing shoulder to shoulder with right-wing extremists who openly want people executed has shocked me.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Kia ora tātou ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Test to Return to Work scheme will kick in on Wednesday now that the government is moving the country to the second phase of its Omicron response. It'll bring shorter isolation periods and the start of the close contact exemption scheme for critical workers. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that'll keep essential services and supply chains running during the outbreak.
So to ensure we can keep our critical workforces going over the next few months, this scheme means asymptomatic vaccinated close contacts can keep going to work instead of isolating if they return a daily negative rapid antigen test.
Jacinda Ardern says 5,620 businesses have so far joined the close contact exemption scheme. Police say they're hoping to make progress with moving vehicles away from the streets around Parliament this evening. Wellington District Commander Corey Parnell says they've opened lines of communication with some key influences in the protest group. RNZ reporter Emma Hatton told Checkpoint she'd just been at a briefing given by Superintendent Parnell.
And he's actually quite confident that the majority of vehicles on Molesworth Street will be cleared by this evening. So that's quite a big bit of news for Wellingtonians who have been fed up with this gridlock that's been there for the past week.
Superintendent Parnell says Wellingtonians have had a gutsful of the occupation, but the police can't arrest their way out of the situation, though arrests remain an option. He says they've been in contact with the Army to discuss what equipment they might have to move vehicles. A former police negotiator believes someone from the government needs to approach the protesters to try to end the occupation. Lance Burdett says offering secure parking is not a bad idea because it creates goodwill. But he told Checkpoint that to make headway, a meeting has to take place away from Parliament grounds.
When you move somebody away from the site, it starts to calm them down. So you meet in a neutral venue, someone from Parliament, 5 or 6 people. So you don't have, 5 or 6 lawyers and all that there. It's just 1 or 2 people from the government that's going to take the message back. Hear what they have to say.
Lance Burdett says such a meeting would also need an independent mediator. The National Party leader says the Speaker's decision to turn the sprinklers on the protesters and blast loud music hasn't helped the situation. The police say they weren't involved in the decision and it's something they wouldn't endorse. Christopher Luxon says Trevor Mallard's tactics haven't worked.
I don't think they've been helpful at all. I think this is an issue that needs to be left for the police to manage, it's an operational issue for them. They're the experts that know best how to manage the situation, and I just don't think those actions have been helpful at all.
Christopher Luxon says he still has confidence in the police's ability to manage the protesters. An Iraqi criminal court has sentenced 2 men to death over a raid on a home in December in which 20 members of the same family were killed. Here's the BBC's Mike Thompson.
Security forces opened fire on the house in Babel Governorate, saying they were pursuing suspected terrorists. Those sentenced were the officer in charge of the operation and a disgruntled relative of one of the victims, said to have given false information about the presence of terrorists as a result of a long-running family dispute. Most of those killed in what became known as the Babel massacre were women and children. What happened was described by Iraq's Prime Minister as criminals hiding under the cover of state institutions. Several other people involved in the raid are yet to be sentenced.
4 helicopters are fighting a fire at Lake Aukia in the far north. 10 firefighters are helping on the ground. Sam Ollie reports from Te Taitokiro.
An area of about 2 hectares of dense scrub has been burning since 1 this afternoon. Fire and Emergency District Manager Wipari Henwood says the fire is about 4 kilometres inland from the Karikari Peninsula vegetation fire that has been burning since the end of last month. That makes it the 3rd large-scale vegetation fire in the far north since December, when the Kaimomo fire broke out. No homes are threatened, but there are strong northwesterly winds.
And a person has been critically injured in a crash between a car and a motorcycle in Timaru. Emergency services were called to Highway 1 at Washdyke shortly after 1 o'clock. A St John ambulance spokesperson says the injured person has been taken to Timaru Hospital. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nigel Collins presents his final edition of classical pop with crossover masterpieces from Brian Eno, Steve Reich and the Beatles. Fergus Barrowman shares some sumptuous new jazz. We are at the crossroads for this week's Little Moment of Calm. And then there's Brett Cotter, organiser of the Big Bike Film Night, a film festival on 2 wheels rolling through 42 locations across Aotearoa, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumarunui. Mainly fine, however scattered showers this afternoon and evening, especially around Taupo and Bay of Plenty. For Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape, cloudy with isolated showers today, gradually becoming fine tomorrow morning. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy, a few showers easing in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay this afternoon and becoming fine there later tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, also for Bulla and Westland, fine today apart from the odd shower about coastal Marlborough this afternoon, partly cloudy tomorrow. Southland and Fiordland, fine today, becoming cloudy tomorrow morning with rain for Fiordland but only occasional rain elsewhere. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with 1 or 2 showers. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora e hono mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. As the Omicron outbreak rapidly expands, New Zealand is readying for the next stage of its COVID-19 response, Phase 2. 981 new cases were recorded in the community today, bringing the total number to almost 5,000. The escalation means Cabinet has signed off on a move to Phase 2 of the government's outbreak plan from 11:59pm tomorrow. Under the new settings, people who test positive for the virus will need to isolate for just 10 days, down from 14. The same applies to their household contacts unless they also test positive for COVID-19. Close contacts will have to isolate for just 7 days. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says New Zealanders should ensure they have a self-isolation plan in place.
We are embarking for the first time in the 2 years since the start of the outbreak into a period where New Zealanders will see more COVID in the community. It is a period of disruption and, I note, of risk. And it'll be nothing like we've experienced to date. But our efforts with vaccination mean we have got to this place without the volume of serious illness and death that so many others have experienced. But it will be new, and so now is not the time to give up.
Rapid antigen tests will also be used more widely during Phase 2, including for vaccinated critical workers who are deemed close contacts. Instead of having to self-isolate, they'll be provided a pack of tests to take every day.
Once a business is signed up to the scheme, an employee who is a close contact without symptoms will be able to go to a provider such as their local community vaccination clinic and secure a pack of 10 rapid antigen tests. In some cases, rapid antigen tests are being supplied directly to large-scale critical workforces. We've secured enough rapid antigen tests to deal with a widespread Omicron outbreak, with 7.2 million currently in the country and more arriving over the next week.
Te Pere Mayor Jacinda Ardern there. Name's Goff and he's off. The Auckland Mayor's confirmed he is bowing out of politics after more than 40 years, including 2 terms leading the city. The former MP and Labour Party leader says it's time to pass the baton to a new generation of leadership. His pending retirement leaves October's mayoral race wide open. And joining me now is Phil Goff. Kia ora, Mayor. Are you over it?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, it's been a huge privilege. 40 years in public life and elected office. The chance to do something worthwhile for your community. I've enjoyed it. It's a lot of frustration as well as a lot of satisfaction. But I always said, look, at a point where you don't think that you can give it 150%, then you should bow out. And, probably I'm looking forward to giving up the 60 to 80-hour working weeks. I said at the start of the mayoralty, look, 2 terms might be a good length of time. At that point, I'll be in my late 60s and it'll be time to pass it on. And I'm doing basically what I indicated at the beginning I would do.
So in your press statement, you say you think it's time to pass the baton to a new generation of leadership. Is that a euphemism for giving the mayoralty to someone young?
I think it's, we as the baby boomers have had a fair bit of influence over the last 20 or 30 years. I hope it is somebody a bit younger that picks up the job. But look, I've also said I'm not about to tell Aucklanders who they should vote as my successor. That's entirely up to them. And I'm not endorsing anybody.
No endorsement from you at all?
No endorsement, and I made that comment a couple of weeks ago when I was asked, when there were a couple of Labor people, putting their hat in the ring, would I be endorsing? Which one of them would I be endorsing? And I said, look, when you leave office, you don't try to tell people who they should vote for as your successor. That's up for them. They'll make their judgment, and they need to do that without any attempt by me to direct them what they should be doing. They can make their minds up for themselves.
Well, let me approach it a different way then, Phil. Does Efessel Collins meet the definition of a new generation of leadership?
Well, Efessel certainly is in the age category of a different generation. I think that's true, and there'll be others, no doubt, now that I've made my announcement, that will be potentially looking at throwing their hats in the ring. So what do you reckon the city needs now? If you won't name a person, name what you think the city needs in the next leader. Well, I think the characteristics of the person that has to lead the city is a willingness to give it 100%. It is a demanding job. It's a great job, but it is hugely demanding. The pressures, look, having done 15 years as a cabinet minister, I can say very openly on your program that I think the job of Mayor of Auckland is tougher than being a cabinet minister. Not quite as bad as being leader of the opposition, I'd have to add. It needs somebody, hopefully, with the skill to do the job, the experience, the ability to work collaboratively with others, the understanding that, we're faced with some difficult years ahead. We're still suffering from the effects of COVID. We've lost $1 billion in revenue. That's going to be a tough challenge. And somebody with a vision for the city, that to make it the city that it can be, a sustainable city, an inclusive city, a world-class city. Those are the sort of characteristics that I think that I'd be looking for. And it's probably pretty hard to find them in one person.
Okay, I'm going to put a challenge to you. You've got 30 seconds. Tell me your top 2 achievements and your biggest regret.
I'll start with the biggest regret is that we got hit by COVID, and $1 billion worth of dreams that we had for what we could have created for the people of Auckland were postponed because we had to deal with that immediate crisis. Biggest achievements, we've doubled the budget for transport infrastructure to finally start to tackle problems of growing congestion, leading to gridlock, dealing with carbon emissions. We've made our water supply to the city sustainable and resilient, and we've really put pressure to improve and create a sustainable environment. Things like, the central interceptor that will stop wastewater going onto our beaches in the Western Isthmus, making Auckland predator-free to allow a revival of our birds and our native bush, stopping or taking action to try to stop the spread of kauri dieback, 2 million trees planted under the Mayor's Million Trees campaign. Those are some of the things I'm proud of, and I'll just add one last one, and that's...
that's a long 30 seconds, Phil. One more, go.
One more. Giving our lower-paid workers at council a living wage and our cleaning contractors, they work bloody hard and they deserve a wage that they can live on.
I know it's tough for you. I want a yes or no. Are you going to pop up as a diplomat?
Don't know. Haven't.
Don't be dull, Phil. Come on, tell us.
Haven't been offered that, and I'll be looking. Look, I don't want to go into retirement, and having spent all day yesterday on a chainsaw cutting up trees that came down on the storm on the farm, I don't think I'm cut out to stay farming full time. I'll be looking to something that challenges me, but gives me perhaps just a little bit more work-life balance than the 60 to 80 hour a week that the mayoralty often involves.
It's Valentine's Day, Phil. Here's your chance to give Mary a shout-out. Off you go.
Oh, look, my best supporter and my biggest critic for the last 50 years has been my wife, Mary. Love you dearly, and thank you for the support, the tolerance, getting behind me when I needed that support, and telling me as it is, and I wish you wouldn't have been so brutal some of those times.
Thank you, Phil. That is Phil Goff, who's the current Auckland Mayor. He's bowing out of politics after more than 40 years. Absolute carnage. That's the case for Queenstown as COVID isolation rules force businesses to close, according to a local business leader. There are now at least 30 locations of interest in the resort town, and the problem is only expected to spread. Queenstown Chamber of Commerce boss Ruth Stokes joins me now. Ruth, that's a pretty brutal assessment. What are you expecting in the next couple of weeks?
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me. What we're expecting in the next couple of weeks is probably that most of us will be spending some quality time at home. We certainly won't be able to go out for a bite to eat or a drink because everywhere will be closed.
Everywhere?
Pretty much everywhere. I'm hearing from some operators that they're expecting all their venues will be closed by Friday, if not earlier.
And why? Explain it to us.
The isolation requirements, Lisa, and it's not just the isolation requirements, but we've always been on board with protecting public health, looking after our most vulnerable. We've done our bit, we've gotten boosted, people are working in bubbles, but unfortunately the information that's coming out of health and the DHBs is just inconsistent. We're having businesses told that don't worry, your staff are casual contacts, but actually the staff are getting close contact pings. We're having businesses who worked in bubbles being told that that's not good enough now, you've all got to go home. And then we've got people turning up at testing stations who've been pinged as a close contact and being told they can't be tested because they're asymptomatic.
So today we're told we're going into phase 2 tomorrow. That means isolation days are cut down. Is that helpful?
Oh, Lisa, if you're isolating for 7 days or you're isolating for 10 days, if you're closed, you're closed. And these are businesses that are on the brink. Business deaths in our district are rising. They were up 20% last year, and 70% of those that died last year died in the second half of the year. And we're hearing anecdotally from our lawyers and accountants that insolvencies are going through the roof. This is just too tough, and there is no financial support.
So what do you need? Is it just more financial support, more subsidies from the government, or is it something else?
We need a combination of consistency in messaging. We need to be clear about what the requirements are, and that shouldn't be subject to who it is that you're talking to on the end of the phone. And yes, we are in desperate need of financial help. And these businesses going to the wall aren't just fly-by-night businesses. These are businesses that have been around for years, have contributed millions of dollars to our economy, and employ a lot of people. And these people, if there are no businesses, if they can't go back to work, they will leave us. And we all know how tight our labour market is.
Ruth, do you have an idea in your head of what you think the isolation period should be, if not 7 days?
Really, with the numbers that are out there, and we're getting it acknowledged from government that they expect that the numbers of Omicron out there are far greater than what's actually being reported, because everybody knows is someone who's got their Bluetooth off or who isn't scanning in. Really, it's time to turn away from case numbers and turn to the people that really need help in the hospitalisations, and they're just not up there. We would like to see us move through phase 2 into phase 3 pretty quickly, and after that, well, there's no reason to have our borders closed now, is there?
So, Ruth, are you saying people that aren't showing symptoms of illness should be able to go to work?
Absolutely, they should be able to go to work, Lisa.
Even if they're positive?
This is not a disease that's going to kill us. This is not 2020. Yes, it's going to hurt the vulnerable. That's why we all got vaccinated. That's why we have such high levels of vaccination across the country. We need to be looking after the people who are vulnerable. Those people definitely need to be isolating. But for the rest of us, for you and me, we should be able to carry on. Return to work. We need to get back to living, Lisa.
Ruth, on the subject of financial support, I'm just wondering how business are finding people on sick leave while isolating, or the leave support scheme. Is it working for them?
Leave support scheme doesn't work for businesses who employ people in the front line or people who are in jobs that need to be replaced, Lisa. It supports the employee, absolutely, but it doesn't pay for the person that you've then got to pay for that has to come in to cover them. And also there's a stand-down period before you're paid that leave support. So businesses are getting it both ways. They're having to pay out the sick leave, there's a delay before they receive that from the government, and they're having to pay for someone else at a time when there's low revenue.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Ruth Stokes from the Queenstown Chamber of Commerce. Now, in breaking news, a second person has tested positive for COVID-19 in Rarotonga. The case is unrelated to an earlier case when a person tested positive for the virus after arriving back in New Zealand last week. It's understood this positive case is currently isolating in Rarotonga after being told they were a close contact of a positive case in New Zealand. It is almost 6:20. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Catholic Order of St John of God has been described as masters of cover-up and moral simpletons. An Australian clinical psychologist has been giving evidence at the inquiry looking at historical abuse of boys at Maryland School in Christchurch between 1955 and 1984. Dr Michelle Mulvihill visited New Zealand a number of times in the early 2000s to interview more than 70 men who were survivors of Maryland's. Andrew McRae reports.
St John of God, which ran Maryland School and similar institutions in Australia, became mired in allegations of abuse and called on Dr Mulvihill for help. She said it soon became clear the order was in a state of denial and still is.
The problem of denial was the collusion between those members of the group who had large numbers of members who had accusations against them, protecting those who had been finally found out and either arrested or extradited.
Dr Mulvihill says it's impossible to believe the abuse was not witnessed by the religious brothers who didn't have allegations made against them. She says the problems faced by the order were extensive, and she wrote to the world leader of St John of God expressing grave concerns.
There is a culture of collusion inside the province which is deeply ingrained and which makes it almost impossible for the truth about these matters to be dealt with.
She says after the order gave survivors some financial aid, it suddenly decided to wipe its hands of them, which she describes as secondary abuse. After nearly 10 years working to help the order, Mulvihill resigned after the election of a new provincial leader for Australia and New Zealand. She says of the 3 candidates shortlisted, 2 had abuse allegations made against them. The one who didn't got the job, and she met with him.
What I found was really a snap, frozen disinterest in victims.
She was shocked with what Brother Timothy Graham said to her.
"Oh, Michelle," he said to me, "we are so vulnerable. There are so many people out there who are after us for our money." I was gobsmacked. We are so vulnerable? What about victims are so vulnerable?
Dr Mulvihill says she became a nuisance to St John of God and they couldn't wait to see the back of her. She says there was just a complete lack of empathy for anybody.
These are the people are the masters of cover-up. They're, in my view, moral simpletons. For decades, they have fashioned a capacity to hide from the challenges of the real world. And the psychological toll accrued on victims is totally unforgivable. It's irreparable.
She says St John of God did not fulfil its mission in New Zealand and were in fact doing the opposite.
Western nations are urgently trying to arrange talks with Vladimir Putin as fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine ramp up. Germany is the latest country to publicly warn an invasion may be imminent. More than a dozen countries, including New Zealand, have now urged their citizens to leave Ukraine. The BBC's Jonathan Blake has more from London.
Taking steps to bring Russia back from the brink. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has been holding talks in Moscow this week to avoid a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia denies it's planning for that, but with more troops moving to its border with the country, some fear diplomacy may be futile. In an interview with the Sunday Times, Ben Wallace said the current situation had a whiff of Munich in the air from some in the West, a reference to attempts in the German city to appease Hitler before World War II. Some saw it as criticism of allies taking a softer approach. A cabinet colleague disagreed.
Well, he's not talking about appeasing. I think the comparison that Ben was drawing, and I know the comparison he was drawing, was around the attempts for a diplomatic outcome that it turned out our adversaries at the time weren't really interested in, and what he's hoping... And
is he directing this at France, at Germany?
No. The point that Ben is making, we're all working on this to find a diplomatic outcome, but he's expressing the fear that Russia may not be as genuine around that diplomatic outcome and the diplomatic engagement as we hope they are.
Labour says it shares the government's concern.
It is immensely serious and nobody should be naive about what Russia is up to and the scale of the troops amassing on the Ukraine border. And that's why I think there has to be this extremely strong and swift and severe economic sanctions, financial sanctions, looking at the energy sector.
Drawing a parallel with events in the build-up to World War II is bound to get attention. And regardless of the subtleties of the Defence Secretary's point, it is a reminder of the seriousness with which the UK and others are taking the situation. And a warning that whatever diplomatic efforts they pursue, President Putin's mind may already be made up. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, will travel to Kiev tomorrow and on to Moscow for talks with President Putin.
Und deshalb ist es notwendig, klar zu sein, klar zu sagen.
He again warned of a strong reaction and immediate sanctions if Russia invades. In southeastern Poland, more US troops and equipment arrived in a show of support for America's NATO allies bordering Ukraine. The White House warned again Russian military action could come any day.
People in Switzerland have backed a referendum in favour of tightening the country's smoking laws by banning virtually all advertising of tobacco products. 54% voted in favour of moves opposed by both the Swiss government and Parliament. The BBC's Imogen Foulkes has more from Bern.
For years, Switzerland has lagged behind its European neighbours when it comes to tobacco prevention. 27% of adults smoke. Most start when they are teenagers. Advertising on billboards, in shops and in cinemas is allowed. But today, Swiss voters said yes to a total ban.
J'ai voté pour l'interdiction de la publicité pour le tabac sur les mineurs car
I voted in favour of banning tobacco advertising on minors. The only argument of the opponents was that the Swiss economy might collapse. But it seems more important to me to protect children from tobacco.
C'est plus important de protéger la jeunesse.
We constantly hear of people ending up in hospitals, having huge health issues or dying, and yet advertising is still here because of the money, as always.
The world's biggest tobacco companies are based in Switzerland. Days before the vote, it was revealed they had been financing the No campaign, warning that a ban on tobacco promotion could open the door to restrictions on advertising other things: sugar, alcohol, even Switzerland's beloved sausages. Voters weren't impressed. Tobacco-related illness claims almost 10,000 Swiss lives a year. Time, today's result suggests, to put health before profit.
Now, let's get to some of your feedback. Still coming in on the protest in Parliament, entering its, it's about to tip into its second week. Police are expecting from 6:30, so just a few minutes away, that people are going to start moving their cars, the cars that are blocking the roads, to some free parking that's being supplied by the police. And a lot of you got something to say about that. This one, though, says, great to hear the interview with Lance Burdett. I totally agree with him. It would help move things along if someone from Parliament arranges to talk with some representatives from the protest. It's the adult thing to do. Now, the District Commander, Corey Pennell, has said they are talking to a core group of leaders within the protest. That's after saying there seems to be a few disparate factions there. This one in says, although I'm triple vaxxed, I support the protesters and the police restraint. I was battened by police during the Springbok tour and arrested supporting homosexual law reform in the 80s. History proved my protest actions were justified. Why are Kiwis so anti-protests? Although I disagree with the anti-vaxxers' views, I am more disturbed that no political party wants to front up to them and talk and listen. Another listener says the backbench owner is joking himself if he thinks they, the protesters, want to enter negotiations with the government. They have no unified voice or representative. Further, with Omicron spreading, people do not want to dine out at a pub. Anyway, the consequences of the virus spreading, people change their behaviour independent of what the government does or doesn't put in place. And on the subject of grounded Kiwis, their court case at the High Court started today, and they're challenging the MIQ system put in place by the government. Shane from Hastings has got in touch, and Shane says, our fundamental right to live safely in our country is paramount. Expats that enjoy living overseas, pay taxes and support their local businesses overseas do not have priority over our safety at home. Thanks for getting in touch, Shane. That's pretty much all we've got time for this evening. Now, the late news team will keep you updated throughout the night and also on what's going on with that protest and the cars being moved. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up is live at Beijing as Zoe Sadowski-Synnott goes for her second Winter Olympics gold. We will catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The next stage of the government's Omicron response begins on Wednesday, reducing the time a positive case isolates from 14 to 10 days. Stage 2 of the Omicron plan has been triggered by escalating case numbers, with 981 daily infections recorded today. The Parliament protesters will now be able to park their vehicles at Sky Stadium in an effort to free up the streets. And it's been a big day for New Zealand snowboarder Zoe Sadowski-Synnott, who has become the top qualifier for tomorrow's big air final at the Winter Olympics. Those